I'm getting a little concerned with the Detroit Lions. And I know that Lions fans aren't going to want to hear that, but over the past 2 weeks, you kind of got dominated by Chicago and Green Bay. You were fortunate to come back in that Bears game over the final 4:30, but Green Bay really annihilated you. And when you go to New Orleans and then you go to Chicago, who just took you to the wire, you have Denver, the Vikings, Cowboys. That schedule there is looking a little tougher than it did just a couple weeks ago. And I think Detroit is fine for getting into the playoffs. They should win enough of those games to be just fine. They'll probably win the NFC North too. But Jared Goff for 2 weeks in a row has had 3 turnovers. And when you get pressure on him, you're starting to see him make some mistakes. And we've said the entire year here, we think Detroit's really good. But we don't really, or at least I don't trust Jared Goff to always be good. And when you get the bad Jared Goff, when he's turning the ball over, this Detroit team is very, very different. And the Green Bay pressured him on 26 of his dropbacks, and that's when we saw all 3 of his fumbles come, when they pressured him here. So next week, you go to you go to New Orleans, that's a big game. They win that game, you're like, okay, let's get back on track here, take care of business in Chicago. But if you lose now, and the Vikings are able to win tomorrow night against the Bears, wow, we're starting to talk about a real race here in the NFC North where we didn't expect that just a week ago.
So, yeah, here's the thing, right? Jared Goff is a good player. He's a very good quarterback, but he doesn't possess the rare ability of guys like Mahomes and Allen to just will you through turnovers. Right, Josh Allen, it almost doesn't matter how many turnovers he has because he's going to answer his next turnover with some insane touchdown drive most of the time. Jared Goff is not that guy. So you need to create a system around him where he's not asked to do too much. He can do plenty, but where he's not asked to create things that help you overcome big disadvantages. This usually isn't a problem, and usually it works out fine in Detroit. But it means that when you've got a game where your quarterback's putting up a bunch of turnovers, you need miracles in Detroit to win.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that I'm not too worried about it because we've seen the body of work over his time there of Ben Johnson. We've seen that they've created an offensive system where Jared Goff's usually asked to do just the right amount, where he gets to show off his skills and produce a lot, but isn't putting the ball at risk. So I think they're going to regress back to the mean, which I guess is progression back to the mean and be just fine.
And let's see how Dan Campbell responds to this too. Because Dan Campbell is such a positive guy. We like him on this show. A lot of people don't. His aggression sometimes doesn't pay off, like going for it, the fake punt against the Packers. Not a good call in hindsight. But when it works out, you're like, so brave. So like, the balls that this guy has to go for it. Now we're going to see just how good of a coach he is, where you're starting to feel a little bit of pressure. Still got a great record. But these next 6 games are important. Let's see how Dan Campbell stacks up against a couple really good coaches in the league.
The next 6 games are important, and I agree. But what this is going to stick in my head until the playoffs for the following reason. The Lions, the goal is not to make the playoffs anymore. The goal is to win playoff games and go on a run, right? And you talked about how Jared Goff under pressure, that creates difficulties for him. You look at the 3 best teams in the NFC, the Eagles, the Cowboys, and the 49ers. Those are 3 of the most fearsome defensive lines in the entire NFL, with creative coaches that scheme guys ways to get to the quarterback. I'm not worried about the Lions for the rest of the regular season, but if you're talking about making a playoff run, whether you're hosting or going to Philadelphia or San Francisco, I am worried about this Lions team to compete with those teams if that's what they have to do.
I can't wait to see what Brian Flores does against them. I think that's going to be those are going to be great matchups towards the end of the season.